Right. Mhm. Yeah, I know. Can you see me back on air? That was very weird. That was very strange. That was very weird. Yeah. Hi. Welcome to the Wells Report. Yeah. This is the Wells Report. We report the news honestly and fairly. We also analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary that, and only that's just my opinion. Okay. My opinion is my opinion. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's completely debatable. So that being said, you can most assuredly share your opinion too. That's debate, news, analysis, commentary, and debate. How exciting! So, if you were watching on Rumble and Patreon, you didn't get a show yesterday. You didn't because we had technical problems. Some of those things bled into today for some reason. I had to reboot my computer just a second ago, and for those people watching live, sorry about that. But the people on Rumble and Patreon and probably YouTube, I'll probably go ahead and edit this to make sure that we start here. But what we're going to do here is we're going to hang on a second. Let me go back over here. Let me do this and let me do this. And that should be it. So cross your fingers. So we've got about 7 minutes here, and that's a little out of format, but that's okay. All right, I thought this was on my end. No, it was not on your end, the conservative too. By the way, are you new? Are you a new person on the Wells Report? We have a chat room, by the way, when we talk about debate. You can call me on the telephone, 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172, or you can take part in this chat room. And it looks like there's a name here I don't recognize, the Conservative 2. Thought that was on my end. No, it was me. No, it was me. I had to restart my main computer, and I don't know why that happened. We're going to jump into that, do the stuff that we do to make sure that we debug things. And by the way, the Conservative 2, if you are new to the broadcast, we normally do this show live from 11 until, we do this show live from 2 until 5 p.m. in the afternoon because of personal things that I can't get rid of. I have got to do the show earlier. When we do the show earlier, it'll usually be from like 10 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, or 11 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, something along that line. So just a little bit of programming information so that you know how to chase us down. So let's get to work. Sorry, a little bumbling start today, and we'll fix it later. We have something that's very important for you to know about. It's essential that you know about it, because it has world political and world societal problems. It's also a matter of world history. You know that there is a skirmish going on in Ukraine. You know this is between Russia and Ukraine. And while we get all kinds of reporting as to why this is happening, we have all kinds of reporting on it, et cetera, we're not getting the truth. I have friends in the Eastern Bloc or from the Eastern Bloc, and they are explaining to me in no small detail that what we see here in the United States is bogus from a standpoint of coverage of this war. I can't give you specifics right now because I'm not able to pierce into the various countries, Ukraine and Russia. There's a language barrier. But I have been trying to figure out just exactly what the political machinations are in Ukraine, why they are doing what they're doing, and what the political machinations are in Russia, because we're not getting correct data. And so when I get into that kind of situation, when there's ambiguity in the news, what I do is I go back to factual things. Here's the first fact. There is a skirmish between Russia and Ukraine. It is something that has not been as successful to Russia as they expected it to be. Ukraine has been far more successful going against the Russian army than it expected to be. And now there are circumstances where these people are now escalating at a very low rate. until today. And that is the issue we're discussing here today. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced today his country will provide 14 Leopard 2 A6 tanks. Leopard 2 A6 tanks for, just ignore that. Just ignore the music bed behind the counter. Okay. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced today his country would provide 14 Leopard A2 or Leopard 2 A6 tanks for Ukraine's military. That's a move that follows months of diplomatic pressure from Kiev. It comes ahead of an expected announcement from the White House today that the United States is considering sending M1 Abrams tanks to the battlefields in Ukraine. This is the latest generation of tanks for the United States and the latest generation of tanks for Germany. Leopard 2 A6s, M1 Abrams are the latest generation. They are the state of the art. Now, Russia has one of those tanks too. Keep that in mind. I've got some commentary on this that we're going to have to talk about here in a moment. The Biden administration plans to send more than 30 frontline Abrams M1 tanks to Ukraine to bolster Ukrainian forces battling Russia. The White House is expected to officially announce its plans today. Quote, the decision follows our well-known line of supporting Ukraine to the best of our ability. This was from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at a cabinet meeting in Berlin, adding that the decision had been coordinated with international partners. In other words, NATO, at least fragments of NATO, are now sending offensive weapons to Ukraine. This is a dramatic escalation in this world conflict because it is about to become, or as if it isn't already, a world conflict. So far, it's been something along the lines of, say, for example, Vietnam, a proxy war between the great powers. Well, this has a little bit different circumstance because all these people are fighting on their home ground. It's one thing to fight a battle in some far-flung country across the Pacific Ocean. It's quite another to be fighting on your home ground and have NATO forces sending offensive weapons to what is arguably your enemy right now. And there are implications that I'll get to here in a minute. Scholz and other European partners would also be handing over Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. He did not say how many. In addition to training, Germany's package of support will include logistics, ammunition, system maintenance. That means that soldiers are going to be going with these tanks. Same thing with the United States. There will be U.S. military personnel taking care of these tanks, both their maintenance and training of Ukrainian crews. Germany's going to do the same thing. This is NATO intervention in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Do you get a grasp of what the implications of this are going to be? Why does Ukraine want Leopard 2 and M1 Abrams tanks? Modern capable tanks are critical to Ukraine's ability to resist an unexpected or an expected springtime offensive by Russian forces and to help Ukrainians claw back parts of their country seized during the invasion ordered by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainians operate Russian and Soviet-era tanks. Western tanks would provide them with vehicles that have more firepower, mobility, and armor. That is incorrect. That paragraph right there, that's incorrect. I'll explain in a minute. The Biden administration has already sent Ukraine $27 billion in military aid since the Russia invasion in February of 2022. The arms sent have been growing in sophistication and capability increasingly. The tanks and armored personnel carriers now being given to Ukraine are the same ones operated by the United States Army's frontline soldiers. The Pentagon has resisted sending the tanks, citing heavy maintenance it requires, as well as the need for jet fuel for the engine. That is not a problem. That is not a problem. I was explaining to a buddy of mine, actually the executive producer of this broadcast, that everybody uses what's called Jet A. Back in the early days of jet propulsion, JP4 was a refined form of kerosene. A2 or Jet A is a refined version of diesel fuel. It's less flammable and much safer. More about this coming up in just a couple of minutes, but anyway, everybody has Jet A. So that's not an issue either. There's some problems with this, and we'll talk about it coming up in just a couple of moments. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells, bringing you the news, the real news, reported honestly. We're talking about Ukraine. The news that we in the United States get from our news media regarding Ukraine is faulty. We are not getting the truth. I hear this from Eastern Bloc friends of mine, people who used to live in Russia and elsewhere, East Germany. And so there are issues here. I don't have any assets in Russia at this particular moment from a standpoint of in the country. I do from people that are outside that country who are Russian. So we're not getting the right scoop. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you the information you need. The basic thing is there is a Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and now NATO powers, long adversaries of Russia and before Russia, the Soviet Union, they are sending offensive weapons to Ukraine. This is a dramatic escalation. These are frontline weapons that are going, Patriot missile systems, M1 Abrams tanks, Leopard 2s. These are serious. There are already armored personnel carriers there that are also state of the art. This is a dramatic escalation. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to give you some background on the basics. Just rest assured that virtually everything you see in the United States, in the United States media, and oh, by the way, the UK media, because I go there all the time, we're not getting the straight story on this. So I'm just getting back to basics so you have a background. I'm going to continue to try to effort more information from people who are there. I'm going to try to find some Ukrainians that will speak straightly. I don't know that there are any of those out there. Also Russians, in-country Russians. Like I said, I have Russians that are friends of mine that have left the country for reasons that brought them to free countries. And I get completely different information. I can't confirm it, which is why I'm not reporting it. This is, doing this news broadcast is difficult, especially when you say, I'm going to report the truth to you. When I can't find the truth, I'm going to tell you I can't find the truth. When I find that what we're getting is wrong, it's either wrong because of incompetence, which I do not believe, or it's wrong as a calculation, which I do believe. I will tell you, but I'm not going to talk about things I don't know. I'm not going to report things that I haven't confirmed. So what I can confirm, the actual mess, okay? The actual mess, and I can confirm that there are now weapons that will escalate this dramatically. Let's get back to what's going on. So the tanks are going. M1 Abrams tanks, Leopard 2A6 tanks. And this is dramatic. Now, why did it take so long? Why did it take so long for modern tanks to be sent? The Pentagon resisted sending M1 Abrams tanks. They said it was heavy maintenance, as well as a need for jet fuel. That is not an issue. The heavy maintenance that has to be given to these M1 Abrams tanks will be handled by American crews. Okay? That's the simple case of it. So American crews will handle all of that stuff until they're able to spin up the Ukrainian troops. All right. So once again, in this particular story, what we've seen is a couple of dramatic factual errors. All right. So that's what's going on here. So why does Ukraine want them? Well, they're incredibly capable. That's why. There is an expected springtime offensive by Russian forces, and they're trying to get prepared for it. So Peter Bayer, who is a German lawmaker who's a senior member of that country's Foreign Relations Committee, in a private WhatsApp message said, right decision, but too late. Not too late. Not too late. He goes on to say that the Ukrainians needed these tanks the first quarter of last year. The chancellor only acted under pressure from inside the coalition government, the opposition, and because of pressure from friends in the U.S. and other allies. So U.S. and other allies, again, denotes NATO forces. All right? And NATO is a historic enemy of Russia and, before that, the Soviet Union. All right, so here we go. At the outset of the Russian invasion, White House was reluctant even to name some of the defensive weapons it was supplying, such as Javelin anti-tank missiles. Over the past year, the reticence disappeared as Ukrainian resolve and skill on the battlefield stymied the Russian advance and offered the prospect of that had been occupied since 2014. The administration move seems to have been calibrated not to invite a response from Russia. In my opinion, so I'll switch over here. In my opinion, that is an error. Putin will respond. He will respond. The question is, will he respond with like force? In other words, the Russians have a tank that is also this particular generation of frontline tanks. Pretty good tank, actually. And so he's going to send those. Or he's going to send those, and then he's going to up the ante. Then what will NATO do? These stair steps. That's how you get into a shooting war between superpowers. All right? Part of this job is to tell you when the tornado's coming. All right? All of this is a tornado watch. I haven't got a tornado warning yet. If I do, I'll tell you. And I'm talking metaphorically. But just so you know, this is a serious issue. It goes back to when the United States interfered with Russia in another far-flung country. Remember when we sent CIA advisors and U.S. military advisors to train an army that had existed under a warlord in Afghanistan, the northern part of the country, and how that ended the war because we essentially used Soviet era and Russian era weapons to fight that fight. So that arguably, you could say that, well, we didn't supply anything that was plausibly not Russian. Well, except for Stinger missiles, which shot down aircraft. So what happened is that if you overdo that, the reason that those weapons were taken from other sources and imported into Afghanistan was so that Russia did not decide that they were going to declare war on the people responsible for arming the Afghans. All right? Well, that's not happening here. Now NATO is beginning to supply the Ukrainian army. That's how a Cold War, which is what we were fighting when we were dealing with Russia, the Soviet Union then, in Afghanistan, that's how it becomes a hot war. All right? Back to the news. So what we've got here, this summer, the Pentagon sent highly accurate rocket-assisted artillery systems, that's HIMARS, that Ukraine used to strike deep behind Russian lines, destroying command posts, logistic hubs. The White House has declined to provide longer-range missiles that could strike inside Russia. That would be that. We would be in World War III if that happens. Okay? In the last few weeks, the Pentagon announced that Bradley and Stryker armored personnel carriers, the vanguard of U.S. ground attack forces, would be sent to Ukraine. How Putin responds to Russian tanks being shredded by U.S. heavy armor will be closely watched. Well, the tanks that they have that are state-of-the-art that Russia has, they can do the same things to an Abrams and a Leopard 2. Okay, so they ask, what can these tanks do that others can't? The Abrams is lethal, fast, heavily armored. It's not powered by a diesel engine. It's powered by a jet engine. It's actually a turbine. But guess what the turbine runs on? Jet A. And once again, we still, everybody's got Jet A. All you got to do is go to the local airport. You can buy Jet A if you want to. You won't be able to use it for anything, but you can do it. So the Abrams is lethal, fast, heavily armored. It weighs about 70 tons. The Abrams has a 120 millimeter cannon and 50 caliber machine guns. The Abrams was developed during the Cold War, and the first tanks delivered to the Army in 1980. They saw combat in 1991 for the first time during Operation Desert Storm in Iraq. And the T-72s and T-80s of that era, this tank I'm talking about that Russia has is beyond those, was able to take out several Abrams tanks. The Leopard 2, which is Germany's main battle tank, is known for range, mobility, and precision. It can travel 300 miles at a top speed of 42 miles per hour. And oh, by the way, the Abrams is faster. Okay, so now you know pretty much how the stones lay on the table. Now, What will Putin do? As I alluded to a moment ago, Putin will either match the forces being given to Ukraine or match and then extend more capable Russian systems. There is also another issue out there. When the Soviet Union imploded, all of these Soviet bloc countries had been supported with Russian military equipment. Some of that Russian military equipment includes one of the best fighter jets ever created, which was a MiG-29. As time has gone by, since that particular issue happened, these MiG-29s basically have been sitting around these Eastern Bloc countries with nothing to do. Well, Ukraine knows all about those. They're just sitting there. They're just sitting there in storage. So after we do tanks, Russia will very likely send their state-of-the-art tanks, and then they'll start doing airborne missions. They'll start doing air attacks. They'll start an air war, which will require the NATO, if the current thinking exists, the NATO powers, to go ahead and let those MiG-29s go back to Ukraine, who will then immediately refurbish them. They've already got pilots. They're in storage too, waiting for planes to fly. And then you have an air war and a ground war. Remember, the Crimean Peninsula is in the Black Sea. There's already been a naval component to this conflict. But Russia was just using available assets. Wait until they start sending submarines into the Black Sea and start shooting cruise missiles. In other words, I'm not telling you, as I use the metaphor of a tornado watch and a tornado warning, I'm not telling you that we have a tornado warning here. But the circumstances are ripe for an all-out shooting war between Russia and Ukraine, and, oh, by the way, NATO, because NATO's involved. NATO's involved. Sooner or later, what's going to end up happening? Sooner or later, what's going to end up happening is that that Russia is going to find and target the areas where American crews are working and where they're training, and they will obliterate them. That is just a simple, basic move. Well, if that's the case, what will America do when suddenly we have word of anywhere between 0 troops, okay, let's say 50 troops, and 1,000 troops destroyed by Russian military assets? What are we going to do then? Remember that the Vietnam War started with advisors advising the South Vietnamese army. This is an order of magnitude beyond that initial interaction in that country. This is serious. This is a serious problem that is going to require a very serious response. And Vladimir Putin does have the assets to do exactly that. Now, I'll also put this opinion out there. All of this, by the way, because I'm talking on this camera, this is opinion, right? When I do news, it's this camera. When I do opinion, it's this camera. So this is all opinion, so you have some idea. We're communicating with the media, with the actual technical aspects. So what we have to start thinking about is that this will escalate into an all-out shooting war. And Russia, to this point, is essentially involved in what is, for all intents and purposes, a civil war. It's Russians from Russia fighting Russians from Ukraine. Now, there are differences in the peoples, the way they handle themselves, and so on and so forth, their own particular local societies. But Vladimir Putin has been very, very careful not to go all out on Ukraine. This escalation will at least force him to rethink that kid glove strategy. And when it comes to fighting wars, Russia likes to just essentially overwhelm and destroy everything in their path. So So once again, what are we going to do? You got to think about this. What are we going to do when American soldiers are slaughtered by Russian army personnel? What are we going to do? How is it that we found ourselves in a position where we're fighting another endless war? Remember, when Donald Trump became the president of the United States, what he did was start to work to remove American soldiers from other countries, NATO countries, Japan, all kinds of countries. Bring our soldiers home. Then, when President Biden took over, he just pulled the plug. Didn't even tell his NATO allies. So we're in this position where we're fighting another endless war. The Afghanistan war lasted 20 years. I've got thoughts on that coming up in just a couple of moments. We'll get to all of it as we continue this particular moment of the Wells Report devoted to the Ukrainian conflict. Back with more on that coming up in just a couple of moments. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. We're discussing the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, if you will, and how a dramatic escalation has happened. We are now sending offensive weapons to Ukraine. This will require a response. For whatever reason, the White House has decided that Vladimir Putin is not going to respond to what is a NATO-provoked escalation of this conflict. They are wrong. I know. You're sitting there going, all right, so, why does Wells think he actually knows what he's talking about? Because I've studied this now for decades. I've been watching all of this for a long, long time. Somebody asked me how much time I spent on my show, all of it. Because when I'm not behind this microphone, I'm working on it. And I do all this work. And we have a real problem here. Now, the White House believes that Putin's not going to do anything. Like I said, they are completely wrong. He will respond in force, and it'll be serious. And so then we get to the political ramifications in what I call endless war. A country at peace. A country at peace has a government that essentially keeps the potholes filled and handles all the basics of government. A nation of war grants itself additional power. Likewise, a nation in the middle of a national emergency, COVID-19, we saw governments at all levels grant themselves power that just flat set aside the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. Wars are advantageous to politicians, which is why they keep getting us involved in war. Now, here's another problem, another caveat to that particular circumstance. The caveat to that is, what happens when the United States picks up an isolationist ideology and stands back from the world? The world plunges into chaos. That's how we got World War II, by the way. Because the United States was isolationist. We were neutral. Well, the enemy gets a vote, and they voted. And endless wars serve a political agenda. If you ever saw the movie or read the book 1984, that was perfectly described by George Orwell. And it was frightening, disheartening, because people will, for the sake of their country, suspend their own civil rights. In the United States, for crying out loud, we stopped throwing toothpaste tubes in the garbage and started donating them for recycling. Were they recycled? No. The government simply threw them into the nearest garbage dump. But what it was used for was a way to bring the people together for what is a circumstance of national peril. Now, when we're talking about political wars, Afghanistan is perfect. It took 20 years to defeat, then abandon the victory in Afghanistan. 20 years. We destroyed the Empire of Japan and the Third Reich of Germany in 4 years. 4. We couldn't beat a bunch of people in Afghanistan in 20? Why? Because it was being fought with politics instead of armies. We are on the brink of watching armies starting to fight in Ukraine. And one of them is going to be ours. Now, that's a little bit farther beyond sending equipment and troops to maintain that equipment. And yes, there are other systems here. There are other systems that are being sent. Patriot missiles are there, but there are no strict anti-aircraft missiles there. There are land attack missiles there, the HIMARS system, very capable system. Very, very good. This is where you fire a rocket and it flies through a particular window in a particular building. And so those weapons are there. The Russians have them too. But what goes on with that is that there are American advisors teaching people how to use them. Same thing's going to happen with tanks. Now the stage is set. And why in heaven's name would you put Vladimir Putin in a position to decide to escalate against NATO as opposed to escalating against Ukraine? Wartime countries, the governments grant themselves extra power. The people of the United States have always stood by their country. Many stand with Ukraine. I believe in the Ukrainian fight for independence. What I don't believe in is whether or not that government has enough corruption fighting capability to be trustworthy with the investment that we, the people of the United States, are making in their country. How about you? What are your thoughts? Telephone number 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. Weapons in the United States being used by murderers, and there's a political response. More about that in just a moment. All right, so there's the first hour, more or less. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. What do? We report the news honestly and fairly. We point out bias. And what we do is we point out bias and facts. When there are facts in American news. We also, by the way, make commentary which is not news. I do not make news with my commentary. Hopefully I never will, because if I make news with commentary, it's because I said something remarkably stupid. And then, of course, there's debate, because my opinion is just as valuable as yours. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. The stories have been horrific. USA Today reports it as follows. The suspected gunman in two separate mass shootings in California this week. Both used semi-automatic firearms, weapons that gun violence experts warn mass shooters are increasingly using in deadly public attacks. 22 of the 66 mass shooters who killed 4 or more people in a public place from 2012 through 2022 used AR-15 style semi-automatic rifles, according to James Densley, co-founder of the Violence Project. That's a nonprofit research center. That is a significant increase of the 123 mass shootings between 1966 and 2022. 5 shooters used semi-automatic rifles, according to Densley. Most guns used in mass shootings were legally obtained, according to the Violence Project's database. Now, on Monday, day before yesterday, several senators introduced or reintroduced a federal assault weapons ban and legislation that would raise the minimum purchase age from 18 to 21. The ban on assault weapons, a broad term, would ban the sale, transfer, manufacture, and importation of multiple kinds of semi-automatic firearms. The House passed a similar ban this summer. President Joe Biden on Tuesday urged Congress to pass a federal ban. California is one of 9 states with an assault weapons ban. California is one of 9 states with an assault weapons ban. They already have these laws in place where the shooting's happening, at least the most recent ones. That specific, it restricts specific models, including some semi-automatic weapons. Quote, the problem is that the United States is a confusing patchwork of gun laws, and each state has its own set of rules, despite the fact that guns are durable goods and can cross state lines. We need a universal standard. So as we come to this, as I point out fact and bias, let's revisit this particular circumstance. The NRA years ago, when the push to remove assault weapons from the American weapons lexicon, what they did is they said that these were weapons of war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the thing about that is that the NRA said, actually, the fight is not against so-called assault rifles, which, by the way, they are not. Assault rifles can fire fully automatic and semi-automatic. As you know, automatic weapons have been illegal in the United States since the 30s, almost a century ago. And so there are no assault rifles. That's why they're now referred to as AR-15 semi-automatic rifles. AR-15 style rifles. But the big issue in all of this is the idea that someone can fire a round with every pull of the trigger, semi-automatic, which is also a misnomer. Because the M1 Garand, the rifle that won World War II, called the finest battle implement that human beings ever devised by George S. Patton, was semi-automatic. That granted firepower to the United States of America that no other army in the Second World War had. Germany did try to catch up, and they came up with an array of fully automatic weapons that had limited value in comparison to the semi-automatic ones carried by American soldiers. The Germans were using bolt-action rifles, the Mausers. So in this particular article, mass shooters are increasingly using semi-automatic weapons in deadly attacks. And what they try to do is since there is a now coverall of semi-automatic, that means pistols, that means essentially revolvers, because they are the same things. So what they say is that they go back through all these statistics. The person that they name is a guy named James Densley, the co-founder of the Violence Project. That's a nonprofit research center. What do they research? They research ways to remove weapons from law-abiding citizens. They are powerless to remove weapons from criminals, murderers. They're powerless because criminals and murderers don't care about assault weapon bans. They don't care about bans against semi-automatic pistols and rifles. They don't care. All that does is render us defenseless before the maelstrom. And so James Densley, the co-founder of the Violence Project, also has a vested interest in coming up with statistics that are obsolete. He says that from 2012 through 2022, 22 of the 66 mass shooters who killed 4 or more people in a public place used these semi-automatic weapons. Well, there's been a big difference in technology in all those times. They make it even worse. They start talking about 123 mass shootings between 1966 and 2022. Weapons technology available to the public of the United States has increased in orders of magnitude in that time. And then they point out, well, that's a significant increase. Well, yeah, it is a significant increase. But what's interesting to me is that the actual increase of these attacks, since they weren't called mass shootings between 1966 and 2022, that is another way to mask this particular agenda, in my view, that is to remove semi-automatic weapons from the American lexicon. Most guns used in mass shootings were legally obtained according to the Violence Project's database. Okay? That is true. That's absolutely true. They are legally obtained. Now, coming up in just a couple of seconds, I'm going to tell you something that Rex Hupke put out today that belies another anti-Second Amendment agenda. But I want to point out that most guns used in mass shootings were legally obtained. So, senators introduced a federal assault weapons ban. They reintroduced it. It's the same bill they've tried to get passed forever and ever and ever. Yes, the House passed it during Democrat control. They were stopped in the Senate. Now the reverse is true. The idea that the minimum purchase age of weapons of this nature, especially AR-15, should be raised from 18 to 21. Well, 18-year-olds do just fine with semi-automatic rifles. The vast, vast, vast majority of 18-year-olds handle their rifles perfectly. But there are crazy people that do make mistakes based on the mistakes of politicians who render places like schools to be a defenseless zone. And the foolishness that says, well, we can't protect our kids like we protect, a Cowboys game. That's ridiculous. Absolutely insane. Insane. So there's that. Like I said, the House passed a similar measure. President Joe Biden, playing politics, knowing that none of this is going to pass the House of Representatives, called on Congress to pass a federal ban. And then we get to the point that I've made once before. California is one of 9 states with an assault weapons ban where these last 2 shootings occurred. Now, when you hear assault weapons, you need to understand this is about semi-automatic weapons now. The anti-gun lobby is escalating the conversation. And so if assault weapons bans worked, why don't they work? They don't. They simply do not. And then the last thing I'm going to say from this James Densley guy, the problem with the United States is a confusing patchwork of gun laws, and each state has its own set of rules, despite the fact that guns are durable goods and they can cross state lines. Okay? The patchwork of laws in the United States is generated by the fact that we live in the United States. We don't live in the Federal Republic of America. We live in the United States. Each state makes their own laws. There is a confusing patchwork of endless circumstance. There's a confusing patchwork of laws regarding income taxes that the states use. There are all kinds of confusing patchworks of law. And that's one of the great strengths of the United States. We can see, for example, that there is a just plain unapologetic socialist government in California. Look at what's happening to California. A state so bad, people are leaving in droves. And as of yesterday, California is trying to figure out how they can tax former residents of California who are gazillionaires, who are leaving the state because of the tax burden. They're trying to figure out how to tax those people across state lines. Only the federal government can do that. So the Federal Republic of America does not exist. All right? And will never exist. And if it does, then we'll have a top-down, one-size-fits-all government that brings horror and death, just like every other top-down totalitarian or authoritarian government. It's just the way things work. Now, Rex Huppke looks at all of this and is picking up an agenda here. Listen to the headline of Rex Huppke, who is a USA Today commentator. California mass shootings show America is too focused on motive instead of solutions. Let me bring this to you. Last 4th of July, a gunman opened fire on a parade in Highland Park, Illinois, killing 7, injuring dozens. Fast forward now, in the span of 3 days, we've faced 2 mass shootings in California, in Monterey Park, Half Moon Bay. As I write this, there could well be another, such as America. Yeah, because we have freedom and liberty here. Like the Illinois tragedy near my home last summer and so many others in between, the California mass shootings have made national headlines. The first response for many, particularly those not directly impacted, is to ask questions. Why? What was the shooter's motive? Who inspired him? Who can we blame? And then he starts talking about how that leads to an uncomfortable pause. It's a feeling that we must wait several beats before deciding how horrified to feel about an act that's transparently horrific. Then he goes on to say that he was in Highland Park the day after the shooting broke in the community in a way that it will never actually heal. And he talks about the mother who hit her young daughter, etc., blah, 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 blah. So what he's trying to say in this particular piece is that we, the people of the United States, shouldn't be focused on the actual malfunctions of murderers, sociopathic killers. We should be working on trying to eradicate the tools they use, which is intellectually bankrupt on its face. Motive is everything. What you need to do is you need to find out who the next person is going to be that's going to go out into the neighborhood and slaughter a bunch of people because he had a bad day or she had a bad day. We have to find that, and that is motive. We have to start working on the motivation that says it's okay to do such horrific murdering acts instead of worrying about the tools they use. This is the Wells Report. Back in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. We're talking about the shootings in Half Moon Bay and in Monterey Park, California. And we're talking about the typical players doing the typical things, reintroducing assault weapons ban, but upping the ante, talking about, well, it's semi-automatic weapons now, which cover 90% of the pistols in the possession of and for sale in the United States. That's clearly a bridge too far. While you could essentially argue that an assault rifle, after you define it incorrectly, is the big mean baddie, well, then what you do is you're saying actually the big main baddie now is semi-automatic weapons. And so what we have to do is get rid of semi-automatic weapons. That'll never happen. It will simply never happen. The other aspect of this has to do with race. Jenna Ryu is an Asian. She's an Asian citizen of the United States. She wrote an op-ed piece that said, hey, wait, the shooter was Asian. That does not negate the reality of anti-Asian violence. The way politics works, in this country especially, is to divide people among the social caste by race, creed, color, national origin, all manner of different ways to split everybody up. This in a country that has a motto of e pluribus unum, of many, one. If you go to Germany, you find Germans. If you go to Switzerland, you find Swiss. If you go to Sweden, you find Swedes. If you go to Mexico, you find Mexicans. If you go anywhere, you'll find those particular people. But we have everybody here, every single person, which presents an irresistible opportunity for political scientists to forward agendas by essentially saying this is an aggrieved minority because of this policy that we want to change. That's how CRT works. Regardless of the fact that nobody in the United States has owned slaves for 150 years. We're teaching our children that white people are oppressors and black kids are victims. That's a machination of this particular divisive politic that I'm talking about. And so what ended up happening? Well, the United States, the first group of these people were African Americans or Black Americans. And that worked for decades. Then we elected Barack Obama. And for about maybe a month, everybody in the United States felt better because we had finally slayed the dragon of anti-black racism, which by the way is a crime against humanity. Racism. Okay? Well, then as time went by and people started solving those problems in ways of actual work, what ended up happening is, well, we have to have a new aggrieved minority of people that look different. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say that Hispanics have same access to the programs and government policies of Black Americans. I pointed out on this broadcast, forgive me, but the reason that Black Americans in this nation are in a situation where they receive the assistance from the government, not just federal, but state, is because in their background, in their family history, they can find slaves. That didn't happen with Mexican Americans or Hispanic Americans who are here in the United States. Sorry, that's just not the case. Now, there were MLK Boulevards, Martin Luther King Boulevards all over, and then there were Cesar Chavez Boulevards all over everywhere to try to use that template to start discussing people of color. And I pointed out, you don't have the same background. There's more to this. I'll continue when we come back from the break. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being with us. We'll be back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We all know about two shootings in California. California with assault weapons bans, all numbers of ways to inhibit law-abiding citizens from being able to defend themselves before crazy sociopathic people who believe it's okay to go out and kill their neighbors. They don't work. So, what's happening? Well, politicians everywhere are saying we've got to impose these laws that don't work on more people, thereby making the ridiculous notion that more defenseless people, are better than fewer defenseless people. It's intellectually dishonest. It's faulty. It's defective thinking. It just simply is. And so, what we've done when we talk about these shootings is now we watch the political machinations continue. For example, Rex Huppke, after we heard about the story, Rex Huppke says, well, the big problem, the big meanie is not assault rifles, AR-15 style semi-automatic weapons, but semi-automatic weapons in general, which is virtually every pistol, including revolvers, and most rifles that people use now. The idea of using a bolt-action rifle is to put one round in one precise place. That's it. And so what the new political move is to get rid of these semi-automatic weapons. Yeah, no. Now, what we see is another op-ed piece that attempts to recalibrate the idea that people of a particular ethnic group killing people of another, of the same ethnic group, is somehow less horrible than, say, for example, one ethnic group taking on another ethnic group. Now, I'll let you know what ethnic groups I'm talking about. Think of what would have happened if either of the shooters involved in the California shootdowns in the last 3 days had been a white American. Then we'd be hearing about all manner of white supremacy and so on and so on. But this was an Asian attacking other Asians. There were Hispanics also involved in one of the shootings. So, what does Jenna Ryu, who happens to be an Asian American, what does she do? Well, she says, hey, just because the shooter was an Asian doesn't negate the reality of anti-Asian violence. And I also pointed out that division is essentially the spark plug of leftist politics. Divide everybody and then play one group off the other. Make one group the enemy, make the other group the aggrieved part of our society. This in a country whose motto is e pluribus unum, of many one. And what Ms. Ryu is trying to do is say, hey, just because this was Asian on Asian violence doesn't negate the reality of anti-Asian violence. Let me give you some of this. Past few days, two tragedies unfolded for California's Asian American community, both of which hit close to home. Saturday night, et cetera, et cetera. I know better than to be shocked by gun violence in America at this point. Unfortunately, these two shootings stood out for the wrong reasons. The suspects in both cases were older Asian men. Not exactly the people we were expecting. That's actually in the copy. Not the people that we usually expect. Who do we usually expect to do mass shootings? That's right. White people. We expect white people to do all these mass shootings. What the heck? What's going on? This is the racial agenda showing its pathological face yet again. So I spoke a little bit about Black Americans who earned, by virtue of their history, not just of slavery, but of racism in this nation, who earned the assistance that they receive from our government. Do they still require that assistance? Well, every time somebody says, hey, wait a minute, we're all beyond that, because most of us are. Black, white, Asian, everybody's mostly away from this by now, because we suddenly realize that everybody's everybody. And it's not about packaging, it's about performance. That's why people attack performance. No, we can't give these kids, a merit-based award because it might make somebody else feel terrible. I just saw an article in USA Today that talks about how division, from a standpoint of mathematics, is somehow negative against people who are gay. Excuse me? Everybody's got minds. Everybody's got minds. Division doesn't discriminate against anybody. It exists. It's reality. But then again, we get to the political aspect of all of this and we say, well, now, wait a minute. The political aspect of this can be served if we somehow create another aggrieved community, this of kids who are gay, who are struggling with math. It's absolutely ridiculous. So when we discussed the racism, the slavery background of Black Americans, and the assistance they got from this government, both the federal government and state governments, that was completely justified. That template was then used to create another aggrieved society, this being Hispanic people of the United States. Somehow they shared the same egregious past that America's Black population faced, which is ridiculous. That sort of showed up and sort of disappeared pretty quickly. I said, excuse me, I was talking to an Hispanic listener who was saying that, hey, wait a minute, we've got this aggrieved racial past in the United States. No, you don't. Don't have anything close to it. Show me the slaves that were emancipated in 1863 that were Hispanic. And that sort of just went away. Well, now the big problem is all of this terrible discrimination against Asians. That, by the way, started in major universities around the nation. Why? Because in the Asian culture, education is the most important things for children to possess. The term tiger mom was coined to describe mothers who absolutely demand that their children learn these things. They achieved. Their merit was obvious. They went to America's great universities and said, hey, we'd like to do that. And then somebody in those universities realized, wait, we've got too many Asians. And so the first discrimination domino got tipped over, which was immediately picked up by the political world and said, well, it's not just education. These people are dealing with the same horrifyingly terrible white bigotry that everybody else does in this bigoted nation. And this particular article is using this op-ed piece, is using that supposed anti-Asian racism. How did she say it? How did she put it? Oh, anti-Asian violence. She's trying to put that into this debate. Sorry, that's not the case. Take any group of people, any demographic group of people in the United States. They tend to live in communities. They tend to live in communities. And so when there is violence, because every part of these societies have these people in them that for whatever reason believe it's okay to kill thy neighbor, what ends up happening is that that's who is doing most of the killing in those communities. And so when you start thinking about all this, it comes back to that ridiculously degenerate pathological statement. The suspects in both cases were Asian men, older Asian men, not exactly who people were expecting. What a racist statement. It's just racist against white people. And the ideology is that all white people are racist. All white people are responsible for the aggrieved status of all of these other people is not reality. It's politics. And that in itself is bankrupt. It's divisive. It creates a country that everybody is in fear of others, which intensifies the political effect. That's just what I think. What do you think? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Yes, revolvers are semi-automatic. Semi-automatic. Pull a trigger, and the next round comes up. Pull a trigger, the next round comes up in a revolving cylinder. Okay? That's the way that works. Bang, 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 bang. In some cases, bang, 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 bang. Always, by the way, if you're buying a revolver, get one that goes bang, 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 bang. Because a lot of them only fire 5. If you have 6, then someone will think you're out of ammunition. And you have one in reserve. Just trying to tell you. Gary says the way to end racism is to quit talking about it. Correct. We don't talk about it that much. I live in a neighborhood with Black Americans, Asian Americans, Muslim Americans. Everybody in my neighborhood is everybody in my neighborhood. We're not any of those specific groups. We are neighbors. Hello? Nobody thinks about any of that stuff. I was walking my Rottweiler Odin the other day, and a Black American, a neighbor of mine who happens to be a Black American, also had a Rottweiler. He had to rehome that Rottweiler, which was tragic. I wish I could have had him because he was a sharp little dog. But then again, I got a sharp little dog in return. So anyway, but the thing about it is that I was walking Odin, and he comes out, he says, "How's it going, JD?" "Fine. How are you, brother?" And we went on about our business. America is over racism. We're done with it. American politicians, on the other hand, and militant members of these particular aggrieved portions of society are not. Racism is not fomented among neighbors. Racism is fomented by our government. All these people, and then they cynically say, well, this is institutional racism. That's right. Institutional racism. That's exactly what it is. What's the institution that's imposing it? Well, the government, for the sake of politics. Politics is becoming the enemy of this nation. Politics is becoming the enemy of amity. Politics is becoming the enemy of merit. Politics is becoming the enemy of excellence. I just read another story just a couple of minutes ago that talked about how the climatologists, the climate lobby, the ecological lobby now point to the United States military-industrial complex as the latest threat to the climate. Excuse me. Regardless of what AOC says, there are going to be people around the world fighting with the United States a hell of a lot sooner than climate is going to have any real effect on the people living here. But once again, we have an agenda that is trying to supplant reality. An agenda to supplant reality. To convince politicians to follow that agenda instead of following reality. Which takes me right back to something that I said virtually from the inception of this broadcast. That the idea that politics can supplant reality is how society crumbles. Fortunately, we, the people of the United States, we are the people. We own this land. Politicians don't. But for the sake of politics, we're damaging our nation. And we have to stop it. We have to insist on it. And that takes me right back to get rid of these people the next time you have a chance to vote. Elect thy neighbor. Do not elect another professional politician that is beholden to all these agendas. It's outrageous. It has created a government that malfunctions more than it succeeds. And this simply must stop. You're listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. I know. Heavy show today. and on earlier than you might expect. If you look at the 24-hour clock on my wall, you'll notice that the hands are in different positions than usual. That's because we're doing the show between 10 and 1 p.m. live, and I'll put it up on all the various websites like Rumble and Patreon and so on, so people can see it anytime they feel like it. But I've got some other things I got to do, so I moved the thing up, and I hope it didn't confuse a whole bunch of people, but apparently people are adjusting. By the way, we'll be doing this again tomorrow. Tomorrow's radio broadcast, or tomorrow's broadcast of the Wells Report, will be heard from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, just like today. And then we'll get back to our regular schedule in time for Friday. This is the Wells Report. Stick around. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. President Biden has announced that 31 M1 Abrams tanks will be traveling to Ukraine. That has been announced. We reported it earlier today that it might be a possibility. Well, now it is an action by this president to involve us in another war. Say what you want. I happen to believe that is a huge error, because part of the actual rationale is that Vladimir Putin's not going to do anything about that. Yeah, that's just watch. Another reason why you should homeschool your kids. A California teacher named Olivia Garrison, who is a trans female, bragged about helping students hide their social transition from their parents. She did that on Monday. Kind of hard to hide eye makeup. Just saying. Fox News found that Garrison, a ninth grade history teacher, worked at Del Oro High School, located in the Kern High School District. That is, Kern County in California is where Bakersfield is. That's where the Speaker of the House of Representatives was raised. Social transitioning is the first step for transgender children. It entails adopting new names, pronouns, changing their clothing, getting haircuts to match a preferred gender expression. The New York Times reported that Olivia Garrison, a history teacher in Bakersfield who is non-binary, has helped students socially transition at schools without their parents' knowledge. In fact, she's bragging about it. Here's the quote. My job, which is a public service, is to protect kids. Sometimes they need protection from their own parents. The report concerned liberal parents who were outraged about teachers such as Garrison icing them out of their own children's care. Yeah. The district Garrison works for is also involved in blocking parents from being in the know on social transitions. For example, the California district has a pronoun change request form that students can fill out without their parents' knowledge or consent, according to the website. The district goes on to list Garrison as an advisor at the GSA Club, the Gay Straight Alliance Club. Please complete the request for a name change gender marker form and submit to your site principal. A parent signature is not required to submit the form. A Maryland teacher, Lane Cogdill, admitted intentionally concealing student gender changes on TikTok, especially from parents. Lane Cogdill works at Silver Springs International Middle School in the Montgomery County Public School District. According to the website, the teacher uses ze, zir, they, them, and he, him pronouns. I'm not laughing at her. I'm laughing at the concept. Cogdill explained that when students question their gender, the teacher will ask them their name and pronouns, and would help hide it from school administrators and parents upon request. Mandy Young, an anti-capitalist science teacher from Minneapolis, revealed she used a survey in which allows students to conceal a gender identity change in her classroom, according to Fox News. While we are bringing this up, let me bring you some good news regarding kids. All right, let me get it here. I had it brought up here, and then it vanished. The governor of Iowa has seen fit to sign a school choice bill. A school choice bill. This is, as far as we know, a first in the nation situation. And that first in the situation for the nation is very, very good. Once again, it's vanished. Okay, so anyway, let me give you the gist of this. The gist of it is that the Iowa governor has signed a bill that would allow the money allocated per student in Iowa to follow the student, not the school, which is the solution to all of this. The reason that we're here is because whether oversight failed or whether we're in a position where liberal politics has been tolerated or supported, depending on your point of view, what happens is that things get more and more twisted and warped. Once a particular twist or warp in what is a typical understanding that parents raise children as opposed to schools and governments, the farther you get away from this, the more you have people dressing in drag and changing their genders and changing their pronouns and confusing kids beyond possible recovery. And so here we are, a non-binary teacher boasting that changing students' genders without parents knowing is good. So what do? You get this Iowa bill passed by your state legislature so that the money follows the child, and you move your kid. That's what you do. Yes, it may involve you dropping off your kid every day because that's the next move from the public schools who are trying to forward an agenda as opposed to forwarding education. But it's worth it. But it's worth it. People are saying, my God, the Republicans are attacking public schools. No, the Republicans are trying to protect public schools by getting rid of people who are outside society's normalcy. And that normalcy is parents raise kids, not teachers, not governments. Parents get medical care for their kids, not teachers, not governments. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us. Hour number 2 in the books. 3's coming up. You stay right where you are. Okie dokie. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in a minute. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news. We do. We bring you the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out each. We point out both. We make commentary, which is not news. A lot of people in this job believe that everything that they say is somehow newsworthy. It is not. It's just an opinion, just as valuable as yours. And so we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. How do you debate? Well, you call me on the telephone, 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. Or you can take part in the chat room, which is on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. If, by the way, you're watching on Rumble and Patreon, first of all, thanks. I appreciate it. Second, if you want to take part in the show, ask a question, make a point, what have you, send me an email. Send it to thewellsreport@frontier.com. In the subject line, put the platform that you are watching the show on, so I know it's you. All right? And say whatever you want to. I'll be more than happy to share those emails on this broadcast every chance I get. So last hour, we were talking a little bit about a non-binary teacher who thinks that in order to protect children, that they should help them work through, shall I say, manufactured gender issues without their parents' knowledge. And I have pointed out that parents who disagree with that level should have tools to be able to do something about it. One of them is homeschooling. If I had a kid that was in one of those schools, he'd be homeschooled. If Colton had been going through that stuff, he'd be homeschooled. Done. Simple. In Iowa, the governor has signed a bill that would have the money allocated, the tax money allocated for students to stop going to the school in their area code or their district and start following the students anywhere they wanted to go. So if your child was in one of those schools, you'd be able to take your child into another school and the money would follow that. That would create in the public schools an opportunity to deal with reality. The best schools would get the most students. They'll fight back. Well, we're not going to allow your children to just go to any school, so we're not going to extend bus service to your kid, which is also intellectually bankrupt. One of the coolest places I ever went to school was the Grossmont Union High School District in California. It was a bus system. They take you from your house, take you to a school, then you could get on another bus and go to whatever school you wanted to in the Grossmont Union High School District. It was as cool as hell. So it can be done. There will also be something else that would go on. Say, for example, there would be other inhibitions that would be put against parents who want their kids to go to different schools. But what the outcome would be is that real education, which I believe most parents want, would be available to them without necessarily going to homeschool. Now, the people that are perfectly happy with their children being involved in this leftist agenda would then be able to leave their kids right where they are. In other words, just as government officials long ago said, the people of the United States vote with their feet. 300,000 people leaving California, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the great friends of this broadcast is a guy named Isaac. Isaac is a Democrat, and he is pointing out a couple of things that you need to be aware of. Okay, first of all, he says, when I was talking about this non-binary teacher who was assisting gender transitions without parent knowledge or consent, Isaac says, you're citing one example. There are millions of educators who are doing their jobs. No, I'm not citing one example. In the story that I did last hour, I cited two examples. And there are more. Actually, I cited three. And there are more. And I would say, Isaac, that in your school right now, there are things being taught that you wouldn't want your children to know. And if, by the way, you wanted them to know these things, by all means, keep your kids right there. But that, I don't believe, is the vast majority. That's just my opinion. You're citing one example. There are millions of educators that are doing their jobs. Absolutely. Isaac, you're one of them. He's a U.S. history teacher. He has corrected me when I've made mistakes in U.S. history. I've looked him up. He's been right, which is just fine. Then he says, so citing one example, just like George Santos doesn't represent all Republicans, their characteristics or behavior, neither do these teachers that I would say, as an opinion, are malfunctioning. True. Okay, that's fine. George Santos doesn't represent the vast majority of Republicans, just like Joe Biden and his lies, prevarications, embellishments, what have you, don't reflect on all Democrats. And then he said this. He said, liberal politics have nothing to do with education problems. Yes, they do. Not all education problems, but in the context that we're currently discussing, this is all leftist drivel. It is leftist. And the idea, the affront against reality that parents should somehow be subservient to the whims of teachers and government officials in regards to the education or medical care of their children, that is going to destroy public schools. Even though millions of teachers in the United States are teaching their subjects with passion and care for kids, still going to destroy public schools. Parents have to be able to turn their backs on their public schools without fear that their kid's going to come home and say, I want to change my name to Monica if their name is Michael, or I want to change my name to Steve from Sheila. What could have been funny is perhaps changing Sheila's name to Gila, but let's just move on. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that when somebody comes up in the chat room or calls me on the telephone, they get heard. Same thing with the email I was talking about. By the way, that's the Wells Report at frontier.com. Mike says, get out of cities. Yeah, cities are really a mess, aren't they? Aren't they? All right, let's move on. Let's move on to something else. The Speaker of the House, Mike McCarthy, is currently in the harsh spotlight of the machine media. I say that in lieu of the mainstream media or the liberal media, etc. He is a part of the machine media, leftist media, liberal media. That's all part of the political machine. Politicians will do something ridiculous like Joe Biden talking about the fact that he was a tenured professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He'll say something like that, and the media will not report the fact that he's prevaricating. And yet we'll point out George Santos, who really reminds me of a Saturday Night Live character. Yeah, that's the ticket. Morgan Fairchild. What was that guy's name? So McCarthy is planning to block, or has already blocked, fellow California Representatives Eric Swalwell and Adam Schiff to the House Intelligence Committee, keeping a promise he made to conservatives on the campaign trail. The quote is, I will put national security ahead of partisan politics. McCarthy has said Swalwell likely would be denied a security clearance in the private sector. That's not accurate reporting. The accurate report was McCarthy said that Swalwell would be denied a security clearance in the private sector. He would be. So I don't know why they said it would likely be denied. I guess they're trying to cast aspersions on the credibility of Speaker McCarthy. So what they say is McCarthy says Swalwell will be denied a security clearance in the private sector and accused Schiff of lying to the public. He absolutely did lie to the public, claiming they are not fit to serve on the committee that handles classified information. Democrats, immediately taking the lowest hanging fruit possible, said it's political revenge. Both California Democrats served on the panel in the last Congress. Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries asked that they be reappointed. Unlike most standing committees, the Speaker chooses who serves on the Select Intelligence Committee. This, by the way, follows a pattern that happened during the January 6th Select Committee. Simple situation where Nancy Pelosi didn't want to have Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz or any of the others on that committee. So that particular precedent was set by Nancy Pelosi, now being picked up by Speaker McCarthy. McCarthy said it's not political. Schiff and Swalwell could be seated on other committees, but not on intelligence. The article from USA Today goes on to say, before he was elected Speaker, McCarthy said he would not seat Schiff on the Intelligence Committee, claiming he lied to Americans as chairman of the panel that led the first impeachment of former President Donald Trump in 2019. That's just one of them. McCarthy said he would not seat Swalwell because of the congressman's previous ties to a Chinese spy. In the article, they say a suspected Chinese spy. She's a Chinese spy. She's back in China now. Her cover was blown. She's gone. And just because I said her cover was blown, don't make that connection. You gutter tramp, you. See, there's humor. There's humor there. You just gotta turn up your subtleometer. McCarthy in 2021, McCarthy said he would not seat Swalwell because of the suspected ties to Fang Fang. It's not suspected. In 2021, McCarthy first called for Swalwell's removal from the committee, but the Democrat-led House rejected the move along party lines. In a letter on Saturday, Democrat Speaker Hakeem Jeffries told McCarthy any denial of seats runs counter to the serious and sober mission of the Intelligence Committee. He also contrasted the removal of Schiff and Swalwell to the removal of GOP Representatives Paul Gosar of Arizona and Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia in the last Congress. Well, that was wrong then, too. Shouldn't have done it. Should have seated those people as they saw fit. The Democrat-led House, with the help of Republicans, voted to remove Gosar and Greene from the committees in the last session. Gosar was censured, removed from committees in November after posting an animated video depicting violence against Biden and the killing of progressive Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He was stripped of his seats on the National Resources, Oversight, and Reform committees. All right, well, I happen to remember a commercial that was put together by the Democrat National Committee that showed Paul Ryan pushing an old woman in a wheelchair over a cliff. Once again, we're pointing out bias here. That's not an opinion. That actually happened. Greene was removed for a number of inflammatory posts on social media. She'd embraced the QAnon conspiracy theories and made past comments that the September 11th, 2001 attacks didn't happen. Both of those things stand on their own. To censure somebody based on that is ridiculous. We know that Adam Schiff lied to the American people, said that the president was guilty when he wasn't, and he knew he wasn't. Eric Swalwell, his documented breaches of security, I don't have to bother explaining one more time. All right? Now, Speaker McCarthy did have a heated conversation with a reporter where he did some amazing political work. We'll get to that coming up in just a couple of moments here on the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being a part of us and part of this report. Let's see. Isaac Tate says, hey, look, this is all political. Anybody can see that. Well, only people that think it's political. Race or gender are hardly mentioned in school, but you'll believe anything. In Texas, it's illegal. More about that coming up. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. The debate rages on the chat room, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch over some of the things that we've reported today. So we were talking a little bit about people who disqualify themselves from government committees. Okay. And Adam Schiff is being removed from the Intel Committee because he flat lied to the American people, and it was proven that he lied to the American people in his capacity as the chairman of the House Intel Committee. Marjorie Taylor Greene was removed because she said some very weird things regarding her agreement with QAnon and 9/11 truthers. So Isaac says Greene, who denies 9/11, is on a committee dealing with national security. Yeah, typical Republican nonsense, he says. And I said, yep, that was a nutty statement, all right, as you know, because I actually do the work behind the journalism I share with you. I contacted the architect of the Twin Towers, and I actually had a conversation with him where he discussed, yeah, that was something we didn't think of. And what I did was I went through every possible open source material that I could, and some that weren't open source, and came to the conclusion that those towers fell because 2 airplanes flew into them. And I've said so time and time again. And I know a lot of things behind it that make it even more true, but it's classified. So, but her statement the statements in general that the 9/11 thing was an inside job is just unreal. Okay, so what I said was Greene, who denies 9/11, is on a committee that dealt with national security and, oh, by the way, was created after 9/11. I said, yep, it was a nutty statement. And then I said, hey, shall we start tossing around nutty Democrat statements? I want to get through this, though. And he goes, how does someone who denies 9/11 get on the Homeland Security Committee? Well, because we're all entitled to our opinions. Isaac comes back with something interesting. He goes, wow, are you truly holding to that belief that people are entitled to their opinions? Yeah. Yeah, that's called freedom and freedom of speech. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Then I said this. Marjorie Taylor Greene represents, theoretically, and let's just say it's true, she actually believes all this garbage. It's garbage. However, General Colin Powell, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, quote, if you surround yourself with a yes man, one of you is redundant. What you need other people's points of view. And dare I say that when it comes down to protecting the homeland, wouldn't you want somebody who's just a little bit paranoid about people attacking the homeland on the committee? That's just a point of view, but I see yours. I understand. Let's see. We would not have known about CRT being taught if it wasn't for the COVID lockdown. Yeah. There are some things that are fundamental. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. When you're saying about opinions and various committees, and somebody has a weird opinion about a couple of different things and still gets placed on the committee, is there a ministry of ideological political purity? The answer is no. Should there be? The answer is no. We don't want to have a bunch of people in Congress determining whether somebody's social media posts makes them fit to sit on any committee for whatever reason. Adam Schiff stood in front of every network that would have him and said that he had hard evidence that Donald Trump was a Russian agent. And he said so. Lie. Absolute lie. Which is funny because he was getting data from a guy who actually was a Russian asset in high FBI management. It's hysterical. All right, let's see. JD, to think and say 9/11 never happened or was an inside job is insane. Yes. Then to be rewarded with a committee assignment is an embarrassment. Well, to who? Like I said, if you want somebody to help try to protect the homeland, paranoid people can be very useful at times. They're the reason why there are, say, for example, burglar alarms. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. The chat room is flying over the things that we're talking about here. We're going to skip around a little bit because we have a long segment here, so we're gonna get this debate on the air. Chris Grimes is another Democrat who watches this broadcast. Chris, we're flattered that you're here, just like we are with Isaac. And what I want to say is that no, I never blocked you, Chris, ever. So just make sure you understand. You are an actual contributor to the show. Okay? And we appreciate your presence. Chris says this: when somebody gets their news only from talk radio, you can understand why some people believe CRT is taught in schools. Ask them, where in Texas is CRT taught in schools? Well, there are CRT concepts that are being taught in schools. They've been caught red-handed at it. Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick pointed it out based on news reporting. And so CRT is destructive to our society. It's absolutely destructive. It was delirium in a college thesis that was published in the 80s by a militant guy who said that regardless of what the United States had done for Black Americans, it was not enough. Okay. So you didn't have to wait for the crickets, Chris. There's the answer, or an answer. Let's put it that way. Isaac comes back. Excellent point, Chris. CRT is another boogeyman. Well, no, it's not. Gary says the mainstream media reported on CRT being taught in public schools. Furious parents fought the school boards about it, specifically in Loudoun, Virginia. Okay. And then Isaac points out, it's time to educate the youth of tomorrow to become critical thinkers. That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So let's stop playing around with their gender and let's get back to reality. Okay. Can we do that, please? Reality? The reality curriculum? Let's see. Gary says critical indoctrination. Well, okay. By the way, indoctrination is spelled with an I, not an E. Okay. Where, Chris? I don't have time because we've got to get back to the news of the day, but stick around. Send me an email, thewellsreport@frontier.com. And what are you watching on here? What platform? Oh, you're on YouTube. So put YouTube in the subject line, and I'll print it up and we'll discuss it tomorrow. By the way, tomorrow's broadcast will be happening again between 10 and 1, 10 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, Central Daylight Time. All right, just so you know. All right, let's get back to the news. We were talking a little bit about Speaker McCarthy returning or refusing to seat Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell on the House Intel Committee. There was a brilliant exchange between the Speaker of the House and a reporter, and I want to show it to you because it covers a lot of ground. He says a lot of things in a very short time, so pay close attention. At the beginning of this, he's talking about George Santos. George Santos, very much like the President of the United States, is a prevaricator. He tells lies, apparently. All right? So people are saying, now, wait a darn second. If Adam Schiff is a liar, then how come you're allowing George Santos to be in the House of Representatives? And Kevin McCarthy says, because his voters sent him here. Not going to have a minister of purity to determine whether somebody is as pure as the driven snow before they serve in Congress. Yeah, like that's true. Anyway, thank you very much for fixing your typo there, Gary. Just saying. I before E when it comes to indoctrination. Correct. So the speaker is talking about George Santos and said this today. He said that if the prevarications of George Santos rise to the level of criminal involvement, he will be removed from the Congress, which is exactly what he should do. And I completely support it. If George Santos broke the law, bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. All right, so this is Speaker Kevin McCarthy speaking to a reporter, and he starts out with Santos, and then they start asking questions about Adam Schiff and so on and so forth. This is brilliant. You need to watch it. Here we go. Cross your fingers.
Rises to a legal level, we will deal with it then.
But
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, you just told us you are keeping Adam Schiff from moving him from the
Intel committee. Is Santos on the Intel committee? Am I allowing Schiff to be on other committees? Go right ahead.
Respectfully, thank you. Because you have direct power over who goes on Intel's screen, you also will be able to raise for your full House, taking off other Democrats, perhaps Representative Omar. But you said that lying to us is something that means you should be removed from the Intelligence Committee. But why is it not a factor?
Well, let me be very.
This is a man who should not be on committee, something you do have power over.
He's got elected by his district. So,
Answer to my question. Why is lying?
okay, let me be very clear and respectful to you. You ask me a question. When I answer it, it's the answer to your question. You don't get to determine whether I answer your question or not, okay? In all respect. Thank you. No, let's answer her question. You just raised a question. I'm going to be very clear with you. The Intel committee is different. You know why? Because what happens in the Intel committee, you don't know. What happens in the Intel committee, although the secrets are going on in the world, other members of Congress don't know. What did Adam Schiff do as the chairman of the Intel committee? What Adam Schiff did, use his power as a chairman and lie to the American public. Even the inspector general said it. When Devin Nunes put out a memo, he said it was false. When we had a laptop, he used it before an election to be politics and say that it was false and said it was the Russians. When he knew different, when he knew the Intel, if you talk to John Radcliffe, DNI, he came out ahead of time and says there's no intel to prove that, and he used his position as chairman, knowing he has information the rest of America does not, and lied to the American public. When a whistleblower came forward, he said he did not know the individual, even though his staff had met with him and set it up. So no, he does not have a right to sit on that. But I will not be like Democrats and play politics with these, where they removed Republicans from committees and all committees. So yes, he can serve on a committee, but he will not serve on Intel because it goes to the national security of America. And I will always put them first, all right? And if you want to talk about Swalwell, let's talk about Swalwell, because you have not had the briefing that I had. I had the briefing and Nancy Pelosi had the briefing from the FBI. The FBI never came before this Congress to tell the leadership of this Congress that Eric Swalwell had a problem with a Chinese spy until he served on Intel. So it wasn't just us who were concerned about it. The FBI was concerned about putting a member of Congress on the Intel committee that has the rights to see things that others don't because of his knowledge and relationship with a Chinese spy. They brought it to the works of the leaders. I've got that briefing. So I do not believe he should sit on that committee. And I believe there's 200 other Democrats that can serve on that committee. So this has nothing to do with Santos. Santos is not on the Intel committee. But you know what? Those voters elected Schiff, even though he lied. Those voters elected Swalwell, even though he lied to the American public too. So you know what? I'll respect his voters too, and they'll serve on committees, but they will not serve on a place that has national security relevance because integrity matters to me. That's the answer to your question. Last question.
All right. So there you go. A lot of things to unpack there. One, reporters, for whatever reason, will ask a question and then engage in debate. And the speaker rightfully pointed out, hey, if you ask me a question, my answer is your answer. And that's exactly what a real journalist would do. But, you know, I'm not blaming the quote unquote journalist here because things have changed, but need to change back. When I interview somebody on this broadcast, when I interview somebody on this show, my interest is not to engage in a debate about what they're talking about. My interest is making what they're talking about clear by asking questions that refine their point. My agreement with it is immaterial. That is what American journalists, for whatever reason, believes is unimportant. It is the actual honest-to-goodness crux of all of it. Then the speaker pointed out that, hey, voters matter. Voters matter. I guarantee you there are a whole bunch of people serving in Congress at this particular moment that you don't agree with for all kinds of different reasons. But the voters of those districts did agree, and that's why those people are there. Further, to decide for whatever reason that other congressmen should determine the fitness to serve in Congress, not necessarily on any particular committee, establishes a committee of ideological purity. Like, for example, Isaac pointed out, why would you have somebody that is a 9/11 truther who believes that the 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by the United States government sit on the Homeland Defense Committee? I get it. I understand. Well, the reason is because her voters sent her there, and you need dissenting opinions. You need dissenting opinions. You got to have people, look, if you're trying to come up with a solution, you got to come up with people that disagree with your solution. If you are trying to solve a problem and you already have a solution, then if you decide to quell anybody who disagrees with you, why have the discussion? Just go ahead and do it. I'll tell you why you have the discussion, because two heads are better than one. Even if those other heads are moth-ridden. Just saying. Just saying. Now, as far as George Santos, look, if that guy broke the law, bye-bye. Bye-bye now. See ya. That's just the way that is. And so if George Santos broke the law, he's gone. And I'm really, really glad that he would be gone if indeed he's broken the law. All right? So that's the circumstance in which I speak, etc. Also, by the way, regarding Adam Schiff and the jury of the United States as presented by Twitter, Representative Adam Schiff slammed his being ousted from the House Intelligence Committee as mere petty political payback. Twitter users were quick to remind him why Americans think he's unfit for the job. McCarthy explained his decision, etc., and wrote this tweet: I have rejected the appointments of Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell for the House Intelligence Committee, and then explains why. Adam Schiff immediately returned with, Kevin McCarthy just kicked me and Representative Swalwell off the Intelligence Committee. This is petty political payback for investigating Donald Trump. If he thinks this will stop me, he will soon find out just how wrong he is. I will always defend our democracy. Yeah, which is why you sicked former FBI Director Mueller on a president to try to prove that he was a Russian asset using bogus materials that were proven to be bogus and caused the FBI to break countless laws and on and on and on. Sorry, sir, there are realities that you have to deal with. The Federalist editor-in-chief, Molly Hemingway, gave her take on the events that led to Schiff's dismissal. Adam Schiff, who for years falsely claimed to have evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia, and whose office is known for widespread leaking to support such partisan information operations, has been kicked off the Intel Committee. University of New Mexico professor Nick Floor tweeted, this is petty political payback. Okay, look, you lied 24/7 for 4 years about having proof of President Trump's collusion with Russia. Lied to the American people. L-I-E-D. It's not payback. It's inevitable. Nice quote. Nice quote. X Strategy LLC senior digital strategist Greg Price tweeted something similar. Quote, you went on TV for 2 years, said you had personally seen evidence of Trump colluding with Russia while being told in closed-door hearings by Intel officials that there was no evidence of it. You should resign in disgrace. The Federalist CEO and co-founder Sean Davis tweeted, good. You're a lying, leaking clown. You and Swalwell can use your extra free time to start the Friends of Fang Fang Committee. Oh, that's a little harsh. That's a little harsh. And Hoy Guzman points out, we're still waiting for Adam Schiff to push that evidence out there. I know I am. So there you go. Sorry about my gooey throat. Mountain cedar sucks. It's intrinsic to Texas, and it's killing me. All right, so, wow, we covered a lot of ground today. We got more to cover. And we'll do that coming up in just a couple of moments. So what do you think? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. By the way, Langston, if you're still listening, you can call that number anytime you want to. I'll put you right on the air, I swear. I just got to keep you away from the chat room because you're a troll. All right? Just to clarify. It's not that your political opinions got you in trouble. It's just your rudeness did. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. You can call anytime you want to. I really wish you would. It's a lot easier to work with a phone call than it is to work with a chat room. But the chat room's great. I mean, by and large, most people are just perfect on this chat room, whether they agree with me politically or not. Remember toxic masculinity, how all men were the problem, especially white men? Toxic masculinity. Yeah. Toxic masculinity is best exemplified, in my view, by stopping on a freeway and changing the tire of a female, shall we say, who is having trouble and her tire's flat and she needs her tire changed. I've done it a lot. I have. I've done it a lot. Okay? That's toxic masculinity. Really, what you should say is, gosh, so sorry I had trouble. See ya. Apparently, that's what we're supposed to do. Or we're supposed to pull over on the road and not change the tire, but cry because the tire's dead. I don't know. Love him or hate him, says USA Today. This is a great article. People pay attention to Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Tom Brady, so much so that when he posted photos showing affection to his 13-year-old son with the caption, "Love this boy," people had a lot to say about it. Many people praised Brady for showing his love for his son with a kiss on the cheek. Others expressed discomfort. The mixed reactions are a stark reminder about the differing views of masculinity and the roles of father today. Roles of fathers. Okay. This, by the way, sort of falls under John David's Man School, where I teach young men how to dress like men and how to treat themselves and the people around them in better ways. You know, it all gets down to basic stuff. It's mind your manners, keep your hands to yourself. That's probably the overarching thing about John David's Man School, how to mix a proper martini, how to do a lot of things that men do. All right, anyway. Brady is in many ways a classic manly man. He plays football. He's conventionally handsome, you know, like me. Like me. Never mind. He's a 7-time Super Bowl champion. It's part of why, when it comes to his parenting style, he's affectionate and frequently emotional when he's talking about his children and his fatherhood. People grow uncomfortable. Well, that's because they're nuts. All right? By the way, I have kissed all of my sons. I always have. Probably always will. And I don't kiss them on the cheek. We do these little chicken kisses. Just like that. Little chicken kisses. If that makes you uncomfortable, okay. Anyway, this goes on to say that Brady shows that masculinity is complex. What if real men, in fact, do cry? Sapna Cherian, the professor of social psychology at the University of Washington, says it this way. Quote, people have certain tendencies for what behaviors are typical and expected of men and women in U.S. society. Women, not men, are expected to be nurturers and caregivers. When someone violates these expectations, it can be surprising and draw attention. And then she goes on to think back to the 1950s, Leave It to Beaver style of parenting that left most of the housework to the mother. As women entered the workforce, slowly expectations for fathers began to grow. I cook breakfast. Susan cooks dinner. I do dishes. I handle output. I clean bathrooms. I do floors. I do yard work. Susan does other stuff. A decades-old theory called the essential father suggests that a father played a central role in his family meant to model masculinity and heterosexuality for his sons, said Ronald Levant, a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Akron, co-author of The Tough Standard, The Hard Truths About Masculinity and Violence. Research, by the way, has debunked that idea. No. The research on parenting indicates that what's most important is parenting. There's no gender to it. It's getting your children up in the morning and dressed off to school, picking them up and getting them settled in their homework. Yeah. Still, the essential father hypothesis lingers. If fathers are too affectionate with their sons, does that feminize their sons? No. All right, so what you do is you have that standoff father that is the disciplinarian, that doesn't do much, that doesn't show affection because it's not manly. There's another name for that. Those are sociopaths. True toxic masculinity. That's true. That is true toxic masculinity. All right? I get emotional when I talk about my sons. Especially the malfunctioning ones. You two know who you are. Sorry, daddy voice. So all of these things, and then they point out the same stuff regarding affection doesn't come up for women. In the case of girls and women, there's a lot more societal support for displays of affection, displays of emotion, said Chris Reigluth, assistant professor and child psychologist at Oregon Health and Science University, and the author of the Masculinity Workbook for Teens. I wonder if I should read that book and make sure that my son doesn't ever see it. Many males feel that men must conform to playing sports and not showing their emotions. That's right. They should be baseball, football, soccer focused, obsessed sociopaths. Wrong. Wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. All right, so this has been the Wells Report for today. Make sure that you understand that tomorrow we'll be on from 10 until 1 Central Time. That's 11 to 2 Eastern Time. And I can't do the math to figure out Mountain Time and West Coast Time. So until tomorrow, have yourself a great day. God bless you, and thanks for watching the Wells Report. Boy, that was a good one. That was a good one. Actually, yeah, thanks, Yvonne. That was a good one. And the reason it was a good one was because I think it was a little bit earlier in the day. By the time I get to the afternoons where I normally do the show, which is between 2 and 5 p.m. Central Time, I've gone through a day of annoyance. And it either distracts me or it makes me edgy. So I want you to think about this stuff while I have 9 of you here watching this live, at least the ones I can tell that are watching this live. Is this a better time for you, or is this a worse time for you to see this show? Because let me tell you something. It really works to get up, have breakfast, take my walk, come back, do the show early. I was going to change the time, but I wanted everybody that watches this show to be able to have it where they'd heard me before. And so I left it in afternoon drive. You're thinking about switching to 10 full time? Well, I'm asking. But yeah, Yvonne, I think, had some issues because she's at work when this happens and she can't listen at work. I don't know. So let's figure it out. Just roll that around in your brain stack and let me know if you're watching this on. I'm not going to edit this out. I'm not going to edit this out of the program today on Rumble and Patreon. So if it probably doesn't mean the same to you because you watch this show whenever you happen to want to watch this show. So there you go. But think that over and let me know. And God bless you and all yours. And be safe. Be safe. Make good decisions. I love all y'all. Thanks very much for being